I've got my tea. We're all right.
I've got my tea.
Here we are. You got your tea. Well, I don't have tea. I have a jar of water. Does that count? It's a jar of water, but that's fine.
I have some water.
Thank you for joining us, everybody. Tea and jars of water abounding. This is Recruiting EQ, episode number 30. Big 30. Feels like everyone feels like a milestone. I know I'm incredulous.
Wow.
But yes, one feels like a milestone to me. Thanks for joining us again. Wednesdays at noon. This is our ritual. It's awesome. This is our bi-monthly chat. The three of us. I get to sit with both of our resident big shots at RGC, Julie and Jenny. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome. Nice to be here.
He normally shows up at some point. Currently having a nap, but Bingo may well also be part of the show.
You know what, Bingo may, and I have Karen who's napping in a blanket next to me. She stole this chair from me, my cat Karen, and I had to kick her out. So I wrapped her in a blanket. Hopefully she'll stay quiet, but you never know. She's a terror, so we might have a lot of animal content.
Yes, we may.
If any animals join my background, then I'm going to be running because I don't have anyone.
They don't belong to you, Jen, is what you're
saying.
They
don't belong to me. No, absolutely.
Animals might be there. Well, thanks again for joining us. And animals, obviously, welcome. Our ratings will go up probably. That's how it works, right? If animals join. But today's topic is dealing with highs and lows, career best and worst moments. I don't know if that was like the best wording, but we chatted about this beforehand too. I just thought it's come up a lot personally with both clients and candidates, how difficult it has been for the past few years, particularly from the client side. They've mentioned, that they've seen a lot of ups and downs in their staff, right? And trying to find someone who has been consistent is desirable because it's very rare now. But even on the candidate side, that they've been like, how hard it's been and how hard it's been that they looked around them to see people maintain consistency with everything that's been going on. So it felt very much like it just organically comes up. So I thought it'd be a good topic for us to chat about. And both you guys have kind of seen it all. I think you've seen a lot of as an employer and then as recruiters, as salespeople too, right? So I thought it'd be good to maybe throw around some anecdotes, some tips and tricks for resilience in this crazy world of staffing and recruiting.
And I'm just at the moment, just to share what's in my mind, I'm just imagining the biggest roller coaster that happens, and it is exactly that, isn't it? It's like that. So yeah.
Well, yes, it is.
Yeah, and your sort of statement in your intro is a very big, very broad, very big, with lots of sort of rabbit holes that we do have a tendency of going off into associated, I think. But yeah, perfect. Yeah, which we're going to do anyway, so it's going to happen. So may as well just get to it.
Can we apologise now, though? We're going to apologise up front. That's the disclaimer, isn't it? Yeah. If we do, please either make a comment, pull us back, and get us out that little rabbit hole.
Please, we've already got some comments of hellos and stuff. So we have a very captive audience, everybody, for these. And yes, bring your honestly tell us if we're going down rabbit holes, but also if you have anecdotes or scenarios, this is a great time to throw them out there so we can get to them ourselves.
I was thinking about this though, and I think, I'm sure Jen's got loads of stories to tell, and also you, Rick. I think anyone in recruitment have got a load of stories to tell, because that's just part of everyday life, isn't it? It's like you get to live and breathe the story from so many different people's points of views. But I think the resilience is to make sort of like a broad statement around it is also something that you learn, that you have or sort of don't have, but your resilience is learned through your journey, I think, in recruitment. And I think when you get to the point where you've been working in this industry for a long time, then you realize, oh, I actually learned it. So now it's okay because it's just part of everyday life. And I don't know at what point you get to that, but it's almost a bit of a tipping point where, certainly for me, when I was younger in this industry, I almost used to fight it, I think, for a while there, like a few years. And so is this for me? Should I be doing this? Should I not be doing this? Should I do something else? What else should I do? And all that stuff. And then you get to a point where you're like, no, actually, this is what I do well and I'm happy with. And it's almost like a bit of an acceptance, which is perhaps when you realize that you do have the resilience to get you through, where it doesn't become this internal battle of, have I got it? Have I not gotten it? I don't think that was a word, actually. But have I got it or not gotten it? I've done it again. I can't actually put a sentence together, but
I think, yeah, and I think you're right. I think with resilience, though, I think that when people go into recruitment and they are being interviewed, if they're an entry-level recruiter, one of the key areas that most firms are keen to understand is in that person's life, what resilience have they, from a life perspective, actually encountered? Because that then does tend to almost demonstrate the capability and opportunity for someone to, understand that resilience is about learning, but resilience in life is also, absolutely key. I don't think that, recruitment, however long you've been in it, at whatever stage you are in your own journey, it always surprises you. I think that's the thing. And that doesn't, the surprise word is like, wow, I didn't see that coming, or gosh, I've not experienced that before. That's a new situation. There's obviously things that happen over, consistently, over time. But if you have experienced something, or one of your team members have experienced it, and it doesn't, your world doesn't implode, that is adding to your resilience, sort of like jar, I suppose. Yeah. It is. It absolutely is, because if you're working with people where things are going wrong and you can't change the outcome of that, because we are dealing with people. People change their minds. People have their own situations at home. They have their own family. You all you can do, or the role that we can play, is to do our own due diligence in terms of really understanding what a client opportunity is, really understanding what that means, what they're looking for, really understanding from a candidate's viewpoint what they're looking for and the importance of what's important in their next move, and introducing them together, to the best of our ability. Things change in life, and yes, it can be disappointing, but it happens. But equally, things can change. Maybe someone stopped hiring, and then all of a sudden we've got sign off now, we can hire. We saw that person a month ago, they were a no then, but we hope you kept them warm. Let's kind of get back in touch with them. So it's pros and cons.
I think, though, going back to that, Jen, I think it's also knowing that, and what I was trying to say earlier is like when you're in the moment of things not going brilliantly, and we've all been in that moment perhaps in the last year, right? So we've all been in that moment or moments regularly. It's knowing and having the confidence that that will change.
Yes.
It's just a matter of when. And if you haven't been through it before, or you haven't been in the lows to the degree that you have been in, as an example, what's that? Or it's the police one.
Living downtown, I both those, yeah. So,
downtown. Then you don't necessarily know it's going to change or when it's going to change, and that you don't have the confidence that things will be different. And no one wants to sit there and hit your head against a brick wall every day forever. That's just not fun at all. But knowing that, having been in this industry for a lot of years, that things will change, and actually, when there's sort of small things, a small great thing can change the next day or in the next 5 minutes. So because it's such a roller coaster, and having confidence that it's just a blip gets you through, I think. But until you've seen enough of that to know that that's real and true, it's difficult sometimes to sort of, just potentially not opt out, actually, which is what I did when I was in my early 20s. It's like, okay, I'm going to do something else, thanks.
But that's the thing is, so to not opt out, to your point then, Julian, and perhaps that was an integral part of your journey, because then you came back again, like you said earlier, and then you're sort of accepted, hey, this is for me, right? So sometimes, you don't really know the way the path's going to go. But certainly I've seen, I don't know if you guys saw this as well, when I switched from being like just an employee to training new people at my last job too, it was sort of like, you'd be able to visibly watch someone, particularly junior in life as well, not just in recruitment, avoid doing the things that are going to build them resilience. Like, it now, but you're like, oh, you don't want to call this person to give them the bad feedback. But you're never going to get comfortable with that if you don't do. So the more you do it now, that's the way you build resilience. Or, oh, you're trying to just email and say, oh, my candidate took another offer, instead of talk to me even and tell me, and then, because I'm going to say, well, go get your candidate on the phone and blah blah. All of those things are what you build resilience in, but the tendency is to avoid them to an extent when you first start.
But don't you also think that there's some sort of like recruitment errors that everybody makes in their career journey in the first 6 months? They will do certain things, and I think the sooner that you tick them off your list, and the sooner that you've done it, and almost like, okay, that one's done. That was a mistake. I've been. I remember one person that I worked with and managed previously, quite a long time ago. They had a very difficult conversation with a client, and they were quite new. They were very articulate, this individual, and clearly was going to have a great career in recruitment. But they responded to an email, and rather than just putting it into draft, which I think sometimes is a good thing to do when your two fingers do that, they did it, and they sent the email, and then it was like, oh, that was probably not the right thing to do. And I remember having, well, exactly. And I remember having they were distraught, absolutely distraught. And it's like, it isn't the end of the world. Should you have done it? No. Could you have worded it better? Yes. But you just won't do it again. And what you'll remember is the moment that this feels for you right now, when you progress your career and you're managing someone and your person does that, you'll remember how it felt and how it felt like the end of the world. But actually, it's not. It's recoverable. And I genuinely remember that, because, they were distraught, and then they did progress and they did manage people, and their experience of things going wrong and doing the wrong thing actually helped them become a really great manager, because there was almost like there were no surprises. Oh yeah, I've done that. Oh yeah, that's okay. But you need to tick them off, to stay. You need to make mistakes. The sooner you make mistakes, the better you become.
Yep, for sure. And you learn, you definitely learn what you're saying from that feeling too. Like, when you get that feeling again, you're like, oh no, I'm about to make a mistake or whatever. The feeling is almost predictive when you're just at the cusp of being like, hang on a second, maybe I should think this through again,
Yeah.
But you
Well, it's the stop, isn't it? It's the stop and don't send that email. That's the biggest thing I think that most people learn quite early on, in terms of check who the emails go into. Make sure it's the right person, that you're not sending the email to the wrong person as well. And that's not just in recruitment, that's in life as well, isn't it?
100%.
Yeah, I think that also depends on the type of person you are, as to whether you're like a checker and a process type person. I mean, I have to say that I sent an email to somebody the other day that wasn't actually meant for them. Fortunately, so that was like still, however, that's another example. It's like, oh, Julie, you're fired. But yeah, I mean, I actually had to forward it back to the person that it was about, which was fine. And I had lots of great things. So it actually turns out really positive. So I had great things to say about this person. So she was delighted. But it was, yeah, so it worked full circle. It was fabulous. But that's just like a learning through your mistakes, isn't it? Which I don't know if it's like a particular low, but it's like just equipping yourself with all of the stuff that you've learned throughout your career to be hopefully do a better job, or at least become relatable, if you don't do a better job, to others that do the same thing.
Yep.
Make the same mistakes.
But so, like, I'll give you an example just to see how you guys feel about this. I realized at some point that my start in recruitment was not that strong on the recruiting side. I had done a lot of sales, but I was in my 30s, so different scenario, right? Like, I got into recruitment very late. I was already in my 30s. I'd already done sales, and I had my own businesses fail, which were labors of love. That was a whole, that's a lot more emotional, right? But then, like, my first 3 placements, none of which worked out. Not a one when I started the recruiting side. The first one was a rescinded offer, and it was my fault. And the second 2 were a married couple, and for reasons completely out of our control, they didn't work out. But one of them in particular, this guy was a fantastic candidate, ticked all the boxes, right? Tenure, education, spoke languages fluently, which was a languages-based job, customer service, relatively junior job, great guy, and all this stuff. Shows up to his first day of work, and I didn't realize he was a very religious background, right? Very, very religious, conservative background. This place was more of a raucous kind of call center-y place where people got partying, drinking. He didn't drink, whatever. So it's just absolutely the wrong fit character-wise. And I was like, hey, it fit all the things. They liked him. They hired him. That's on them, actually, to an extent. But still, his first day, one of the managers there has got his headphones in and he's singing along to hip hop lyrics, you know? So it's like F this and whatever, you know what I mean? This kid's just like, oh my God, I have to say something. He's so scandalized, this person was doing it. And he confronts this guy who was a manager about the lyrics he's saying, not really familiar. He wasn't from Toronto, right? So he was from elsewhere in the world, but still confronts him, and specifically about the treatment of women, the portrayal of women in hip hop. He's just kind of, I don't feel like this is appropriate for the workplace. Like he was like scandalized, whatever. This other guy's like, who the hell are you? You know, ended up saying, probably jokingly, I'm going to take you out into the parking lot and beat the crap out of you if you don't leave me alone about my music that I'm listening
Oh, good Lord.
It goes so wrong. So my boss gets a call. It's my first month in recruitment, right? It's my second placement. The first one was a rescinded offer, and now this. And he gets a call from a client being like, who the hell is this guy you sent over? He's about to get in a fight in the parking lot with one of the managers. So they had to talk the client down off the ledge. It was such a huge deal. It escalated so much out of our control. But of course, then I'm like, well, yeah, okay. So now we really need to probe beneath the surface and find out what people's character is like outside of an interview. It was a valuable lesson, right? But I think to myself, if I had been in my 20s instead of in my 30s, would I have gotten turned off from recruitment? My first 2 placements, you know what I mean? Might have said, you know what, screw this.
I think I'm turned off, let alone you at that point. Yeah, I'm like, really?
Yeah. Right, to that resilience piece. But then how do you know, it informed how I do stuff now, which is a lot on the personal side, right? It fits in perfectly with my brand right now.
You know what? One of the just going back to the sort of the title of this for a minute. I mean, I think for me, one of the highs actually about this, which can equally be a low to your point here, Rick, is that you just never know what's going to happen. You just never know what's going to happen, who's going to say what, when. How it's going to be received or perceived, and you just don't know if things are going to explode, implode, or just be okay. And I find that really, perhaps I'm just a bit strange, but I find that actually quite exciting. It's like, okay, who's going to like who? Who's going to like who? And how's it going to work out? And what's going to, that actually is like a puzzle piece into the bigger puzzle, and that is exciting. And you just don't know what's going to happen. And I find that quite thrilling. So that for me is the up on the roller coaster. When it works, it's the thrill of when it does work is sort of, but then you've also got some stories, right? And we've all got lots of stories, I'm sure, about sort of like things not quite as dramatic perhaps as that, Rick, but lots of stories about which make you giggle, as well as it might be a high or a low, but actually it makes it fun, which is something which I think when you throw that into the equation of recruitment, that keeps you through, and it allows you to persevere through difficulties, and sort of, I think, adds to your resilience, because it just now has got a different flavor about it. When it's hard, if you can throw in some fun, that makes things a lot easier.
For sure. Yeah. Absolutely. And just for the record, everything turned out fine. We got that guy into the job. Loved it. Yeah,
you got the new job. Okay, perfect. Okay, well, good.
But for a brief moment there, it was just kind of like, what the hell am I doing for a living right now?
Yeah. One of sort of in the olden days, let's say sort of back in sort of like the late 90s, early 2000s, when I was doing this, we used to have, and the model was, and this was in the UK, the model then was having a shop front. So we would have, and in Canada, I mean, I know that sort of some of the larger agencies still have shop fronts, but it was what we would do is we were trying to attract walk-ins. So where Jenny and I used to work, actually, we used to work down a fairly, how would I describe the street? A fairly active street, which was close to the seafront in Brighton, which was, again, fairly active and busy. So we had a lot of foot traffic going past our door every single day. So the characters that used to come into the door or come into the office weren't necessarily looking for a job at all. It was just somewhere to sort of like lay their hat for the minute, or just pop in to say hi, or do whatever they were going to do. So it was just sort of thinking about sort of fun times, which just made your day sometimes. It was like, good Lord. Okay, who would have ever expected that to have happened? I remember one guy, which is completely off topic, I'm down a rabbit hole here, but one guy literally did come in. I'm sure you've got lots of examples too, Jen, but came in, and then at the front of reception, so we were generally behind, there's probably about, I don't know, 10, 15 of us in there in terms of consultants, just came in and sort of like just launched into full opera. sort of there, right there and then. It's like, okay, great, perfect. What do we do with that? Okay, thanks, thanks
awesome.
everyone. Yeah, thanks, and just the most bizarre situations that you wouldn't put on the day one in the job of. This is what might happen. So that, I think, sort of adds to the spirit and the colour of what we do. Certainly in those days, when it was sort of like, you know, footfall, and you just really didn't know what was going to happen next.
Were they any good? Do you remember? Like,
they were very good. They were very good. Yes, not necessarily sort of, you know, completely, you know, playing with the full deck elsewhere, but very good at singing, and was a very good, had a very good voice. Absolutely, it was very entertaining.
That's pretty cool then.
Yeah, it was very cool. Yeah.
You don't necessarily want people coming in and singing opera very badly at you all day. That's
no, absolutely, but just very funny and very memorable. And one thing that I'll always, you know, throughout this sort of journey, remember, and lots of instances actually, but just going back to sort of career sort of highs and worst moments and stuff like that. I think also going back in time, perhaps with rose-tinted glasses, was around sort of the people that we worked with then. And I think that we have, and that's how I met Jenny. Well, one of the reasons that I met Jenny, and sort of the relationships that you build over or can build from your days in staffing and recruitment, which can take you throughout your life. And you know, we had such a strong bond with everyone that worked in our office there, and with like-minded individuals that had sort of similar goals. And, you know, there was a group of us, and still are a group of, I know that you're obviously very in touch with a lot of them still in England, Jen. There was probably about sort of 10 to 15 in this group, and a very strong unit of people from staffing that have spanned, and those friendships have spanned sort of 30 years.
30 years, yeah.
Which is brilliant. It's brilliant. I didn't like anyone at school that I went to with. I didn't have any friendships from school.
Everybody who went to school.
And I was going to say university then, but I didn't go to university. So didn't have any friends from university, but from my days in staffing, fabulous friendships that were formed for a very long time.
Yeah, I agree. I actually, and you know, obviously the market's different now, but one of the elements of one of my highs is exactly the same in terms of being so grateful to be working in an office with people. And then, I mean, last week I went out to dinner with 7 people that we used to work together. They're not all in recruitment. I think one person is still in recruitment, but actually the highs and the lows and the resilience and the fun and the tears and the difficulties actually, you know, have been throughout my life, you know, those like you, Julie, you know, in terms of that. And I am forever grateful that I got into recruitment to experience that as well.
Yep.
And I know that there's lots of careers that you can do that with, but certainly it feels very precious, is what it feels.
Yes. Very precious.
Well, oh, sorry, please go on. I was going to say that we've been getting comments on the side, and I just wanted to address one of them that came in on the not so great stuff that happens in recruitment too. And again, we're not naming anybody here, so you can feel free to let it be confidential on the recording in any case. Had to walk out a contractor off site because she showed up drunk on the job. Dun, dun, dun. That's
I've had to pull in when we used to do send outs kind of face to face, and you would be getting, you know, if you were in a local branch and you had the shop front, and before someone went to the interview, you might walk them to the interview, but you'd certainly sit down with them first of all. And there have been numerous occasions where you can tell that it would be best to rearrange that interview and for that person not to be going. So yeah, it's unfortunately it happens, you know. It really does. So
yeah. Which is actually unfortunate and sad. So let's move on to something else that's a bit more positive.
Absolutely.
Yes.
On the drinking front, I mean, there have been people who were really had a lot of trouble, certainly that I saw, talking to candidates about do's and don'ts for the interview. Just simple things like make sure you have a crisp resume. This is the words. This is the dress code. Just things like dress code and whatever and style. You know, it can be awkward, but that's another thing that some people they shy away from it, and then it can totally bite you. Like that person would have used that advice. You know what I mean? And it's not, it doesn't have to be a big deal, but being able to be casual about these potentially awkward things, it's like it's a big part of what either is going to drain you and stress you out in the job. But if you do it a few times, you realize it's not a big deal as long as you do it respectfully. And you know what I mean?
I think you have to practice things like that. You have to practice it because it is uncomfortable. No one wants to say something which is potentially going to offend anybody. I don't think
By the
anybody
way, bro, you dress like crap.
By the way, but we all sometimes have to because it's you know, sort of impressions do count, and how you present yourself does matter. Especially in an interview, it's the first. There's a stat, isn't there? Like people make a decision about whether you actually warm to someone in the first 2 seconds, is it, of meeting them? So if you are not dressed similarly to the interviewer, which is probably then how they or what their expectation is going to be, then that is going to make a difference. Another old story is again going back to the first organisation that we worked at. I mean, literally, we used to. This was a long time ago, but we used to put and give people our clothes, like jackets.
No,
like if they didn't. Seriously, just push them up a little bit, you know, because back then I'm totally dating myself here, but it was the shoulder pad age, right? So it's shoulder pad age where, and especially in England where it was like very, it was not casual at all. It was very suited and booted. I mean, I was around, sadly, when we even got the memo that it was okay for women to wear trousers.
Yeah, I was there.
Yeah. So we both lived through that era, sadly. But so in our younger days, it was like, you needed to go to an interview in a suit jacket or a suit, and not everyone has a suit, or a sort of like a posh looking jacket.
And this wasn't recruitment. This was just this was commercial,
just general,
wasn't it? So it was just general. And I think that in that time, in some ways, because that was what you did, in some ways it was easier, whereas nowadays there is a little bit of more fluidity about if a company has a dress down policy, what is appropriate to wear to the interview, what is appropriate, you know, is it okay to mirror what someone's wearing, or is the expectation that that person still goes smarter versus smart casual? And I think that's more of a grey area now, whereas at least, you know, back in the day, it was you wore a tie. You just wore a tie if you were a chap, and if you were a female, then you might wear a scarf or stuff like that. So
ties. So here's a funny story. So I actually so my last sort of full-time job, I worked for a creative agency where wearing ties is like, what? Like whoever wears a tie, because unless you've got sort of thick black glasses on, right, sorry, you're not cool, right? So you have to have the glasses whether you need glasses or not, because that makes you cool. But wearing a tie is like,
go on, take them off, Rick.
Forbidden. So but this also was sort of 8 years ago, and I did start with them almost now, probably about 15, 20 years ago. So this also is going back some time. But anyhow, my point is that I actually hired, so I was interviewing a fellow one time, and he will know this, whoever, he totally will know this and recall this. But I was interviewing someone who came along for the interview, and it was actually via video, and he had a tie on. And for me, it was like, this is like really unusual, because A, he's got a tie on, and B, he was selling creative services, which is like a total no-no. So we had to get the elephant out of the room and talk about the tie. So we decided that we would have a tie burning party actually at the point where he did start with us, because it just was not going to be a good look for him in the new business, in the organization that he was joining. And it became the joke, right? It totally became the joke between us, but it was real. And it's like, I can't believe you've got a tie on. Like,
I worked in a business, in the last business that I worked in, and there was still the dress code for men was ties until probably a few years before I left, and if it was a really, really hot day, there was an allowance that you didn't have your tie on, but you always needed to have a suit jacket behind your chair. That's what you did. And I think that I think the UK probably was slightly behind Canada and the US in terms of dress code and flexibility. But it was just a given that that's what you did. That's what you wore to work. And, it was Yeah, that was the norm, really. I'm trying to think. So it's probably 7 years. So maybe 10 to 11 years ago, it was maybe relaxed, but
I think
that's
that's,
not long
yeah,
ago,
it's
though.
entirely cultural. I mean, can you believe that we lived through the era where you got the memo saying it was okay to have women wear trousers? I mean, it's like,
Yeah,
really? Like, I can't. I mean, even saying that now, it's like, really?
Yeah.
I know when that came out as well. I
Yeah,
remember it.
yeah, I totally remember it. It's like in here, like sort
Yeah,
of in the vault. Yeah, how bizarre. But I do think that that's a cultural thing with
yeah.
British too. It's you know, it's sort of stiff upper lip, and everyone has to be uncomfortable at work, where it's not like that everywhere else in the world.
No,
No.
no, absolutely. But I still, I mean, highs and lows in terms of recruitment. I don't think you can ever take away your first placement, like whether it gets rescinded, Rick, or not. But it's still,
Yeah, well done. You got the award for that then, Rick.
yeah, but it's still,
I was
I mean,
telling
I
y'all,
do.
by the way, I kept my job for some reason. I just wasn't doing great on the recruiting side.
But I still remember, actually that first offer, the first candidate, and I'd come from a sales repping background before I went into recruitment. And one of the reasons that I wanted to go into recruitment is I still wanted to sell, but I wanted to be able to still have the face-to-face contact, and not be lonely driving around in a car and, meeting customers on my own. I wanted to have the team staff. And I remember getting this first placement and being over the moon, and the candidate brought in a bouquet of flowers, and I was like, to say thank you to me for helping her get this placement.
Yeah.
And it was just like, oh my goodness, this is the best job in the world, the absolute best job in the world, that I have enabled that to happen, for her to feel so excited about her next career. Absolutely, yeah, fantastic. So I don't think you ever not forget your first, however long you've been in recruitment, you still, there's other memorable ones along the way, but the first one is so special.
It is, even when it doesn't work out. in my case.
You know, I honestly don't. I don't remember my first placement, honestly. So that's, yeah. So I completely go against what you just said there, Jen. But I don't remember my first one. What I do remember, though, which was a real rookie mistake, and we're doing like a bit of a how it used to be here. But this is, I thought this was just funny, because I used to so we used to sell commercials. We used to be in a commercial business, which is just general admin and sort of customer service, secretaries, that type of thing. So we would place those folks. So those are the types of jobs that we would work in and try and pick up and place. Anyway, so I remember how obviously one of our jobs was to cold call, and at that point we used to cold call from the paper. The paper used to come out every either Wednesday or Thursday or something like that. Someone used to run up to the newsagents, pick up the paper, bring it back to the office, and the manager used to cut it up. So cut up the ads, pass them around, who got whichever, sort of, then you have to call them, and it's like, oh, like, okay, fear sets in. I'm going to have to canvass jobs, in front of everyone, as well, while they're trying to do the same thing with the jobs that they've got. And I remember the job ad that I had, or one of the job ads that I had, was telesales people, which for anyone that has ever done telesales, it's like people don't want to do telesales. I mean, so it was just like the worst job that anyone could ever do then. But everyone wanted them. So it was, in terms of supply and demand, every client that you could ever sort of speak to would probably have like 20. I mean, I need 20 telesales people, but you could never fill the job. So from my perspective, though, I had this job advert which was like for telesales people. So I made this call. So I made a canvas call, and I couldn't believe it, because I got these jobs on. So I picked up the jobs from the client, and I was like, oh my God, I am just brilliant at this, because I have got all of these telesales jobs on, and everyone else around me is going, oh, really? Oh, like, and I'm like, but what's the problem? Like, it's just like, and I didn't realize that they were the most unfillable roles that you could ever have picked up during a canvas session. But to me, so that was a high and a low, because it's actually, now looking back, it was like really funny, because it's like, yeah, I did really well, but not really. But it's just, one of those things that I will remember as sort of like new kid on the block, and what is fillable, what's not fillable, and sort of how to be commercial in staffing.
Yeah.
But I think that I mean, obviously, the last year, hasn't been amazing for lots of people in recruitment. It's been, depends on the sector that you're in, but it's been quite hard. But I think when probably we were talking about this earlier, but when you look back and you look at all the different sort of recessions that have happened over a period of time, actually, it's a moment in time for a period of time, and you do get through it. And what you learn is that having really strong relationships with candidates, having really strong relationships with customers, ensures that you protect your business when it does, when the market changes, when the economy changes. And it's it is for a moment in time, and there's different challenges when the economy is shrinking, and there's equally different challenges when the economy is at full growth. It's not saying one is better than the other, but they are different challenges that you have to get your head around and kind of work smarter in terms of what you're going to do in the hours of the day that you've got. But once you've almost got through your first recession, COVID, I know wasn't a recession, but that was a worldwide change in terms of how people were and what they were, things fell off a cliff, jobs and everything like that. And once you've got through that, then it's almost like, actually, I've done it, I can do this again. And working with people that have also experienced setbacks and difficult times in the economy, I think is also really helpful.
Yes.
Because it is momentary. It will not last forever. No. There will be a day when it is, and the signs, start showing. And in some of the sectors that I used to look after, you could see when the market was shifting because of the increase in certain needs. And you could also see when the market, it was almost like the temperature before it kind of got into the, into the marketplace. Oh, okay, there's a bit of a shift. There's a higher requirement for these types of people, which shows that actually, whether it was insolvency, it shows that their market is shifting. And then, the reverse of that as well. So it's interesting. I think that any market is interesting to work in, and there's pros and cons for all markets, really. It's nice if it's buoyant, absolutely, but it doesn't mean people set up businesses in a recession that are super, super successful.
Absolutely.
So, and in some ways they actually say, don't they, setting up a business in a recession actually often gives you a greater chance of being successful, because you're doing it with a strategy, a plan, with you're driven, you're motivated to do it, and you've got to put the effort in, and it's going to be hard work.
Yep. So I'd say that we're working with a client right now, and this is not me trying to sell that particular client, but we're working with a client now who is doing exactly that. So who is trying to be opportunistic around what is happening or has happened in the market over the last few months to position themselves at a point of high growth through hiring people that may or may not have been available in a more buoyant market, and for various reasons might be thinking about a change because of these sort of circumstances that they're in currently. So that's exactly what they're trying to do. And I think if they're able to, or anyone's able to do a good job and sort of take some strides, then when things do start, then the only way is you've got like a sort of almost like a straight up trajectory going on there, which could really fast track anything else that they've done, or and also take market share. If there's a laissez-faire sort of feel going on in terms of like, oh, things are a little bit quiet, or it's a really opportunistic, bold but opportunistic situation to be in, as long as you've got the cash behind you to do that, right?
Well, for sure. And like, just from a salesperson perspective, I'll throw one of my highs into the ring then, from back when I was doing tech sales, which they taught us. They're like, any big account, a whale of an account is 12 months minimum in the making, 12 to 18 months. They're dealing with your competitors. They're used to your competitors. They like your competitors. They don't know you at all. You're nobody. You've come out of nowhere. You're new to the business. In the case of us, where I was a trainee, they're training us. And I was a kid too. It's like, find people, and they're like, but get someone on the phone and then give them a quote, and then find a reason to talk to them once a month, twice a month minimum, for 12 months. Don't expect them to give. Just say like, hey, they told me. You could say they told me to say you're not going to change from your vendor in 12 months. So I'm just going to keep talking to you if that's cool. What do you watch on TV or whatever else? I'll put on the video to send you a quote. My first day, I got some guy on the phone. He was the CIO of a company. I'm like, okay, cool. We didn't know in the system how big they were, but they were kind of big. He was a bass player in a band. He was 10 years older than me, whatever else. We talked about music stuff because that's my thing. I sent him a quote every week, once a week. I sent him a quote. Of course, your boss looks at your quotes. Which ones of these are going to close? And they're like, oh, these guys again, Rick. You're never going to. Why are you still doing this every month? I know they told you to do it in training, but get real, man. They're not going to give you any business. Sure enough, just after a year, I've now become friends with this guy. And he goes, yep, our vendor screwed up. Our vendor was the big company. They screwed up. We're giving you all the business. And I was like, sorry? Call this guy. He's going to give you a PO. He gave me a PO for $270,000 USD. $270,000 PO. It was multiple pages long. I was way out of my depth. I'm like, I need help to fill this order. It was huge. It turned out they had 30,000 nodes, right? So they were a giant client, biggest client that the company had ever signed on. And I accidentally, with no idea what I was doing, just followed the advice blindly. But that's the kind of thing that can happen in a down period, right? Is you can create relationships and not talk about work, develop rapport with people, and then when things do swing up again, now suddenly you're pals with people who are going to be fantastic clients. So it's a good education in how to treat sales when you're not just transactionally processing orders and whatnot.
I think I was always taught that if you, and particularly on the temp side as well, if you make a call to a client and they instantly give you a temp booking, then their loyalty with their existing supplier is not where it needs to be. What you want is you want the loyal clients that actually you have to work for, because you know that when you start supplying temps and contractors to them, that they will stick with you and they will have exactly that conversation, Rick. We're happy with our vendor, actually, why do we need to change? We're happy, they're doing a great job, until things change. And I think loyalty in any sector, in any sales sector, whatever you're selling, is the most important thing. So the harder the client is to get that first opportunity with, probably the more valuable they will be, because actually they've been loyal to their existing supplier.
And the harder they are to lose.
And harder to lose. And sometimes we forget that. So when it is going tough and you are making those calls on a 2 weekly, 3 weekly basis, Rick, and like you've just said, actually there is, the closer you are getting to turning that client around.
But also that's when you do turn them around, that's the highest high.
Yes,
so the ones that are harder to get are the ones that are like, oh goodness, I currently walk on water, once you've actually cracked them. The ones that, like you say, the ones that are easy, it's like, oh, well, anyone can pick those up, because there's nothing actually that special about me particularly. It's just anyone can pick them up. And Jane, who's sat next to me, who might call them tomorrow, could pick them up for me, who could, and it's just like tag team. So that is the best high. I think the other thing actually is high, if you've had a struggle with a client, if you've had a struggle and maybe they're lapsed, or there's a lapsed problem or difficulty that you can turn around, that's the other high. When you can sort of turn it back into opportunity, that they may give you a chance to do something which was different from perhaps what they've experienced before. I think that is the other high that you can get from when you're talking about business development and client loyalty and winning business.
I think sometimes though, where sometimes people find it disheartening is when things go wrong, but actually the loyalty you gain in terms of putting it right and doing something and actually resolving it and being transparent and being honest and getting it back on track and actually opening that cupboard with the elephant in it and actually dealing with it and having that conversation, even if things have gone wrong, actually builds more loyalty with that customer, because it's all well and fine everything being hunky-dory, but actually the true test is when it goes wrong. And that actually is, I think sometimes people forget that, and they should be looking at that as, I kept that client, it went wrong, I put my hands up, it was my fault, whatever it was, whatever happened, but actually we're still doing business together because our relationship has deepened through something going wrong, actually, which I think sometimes we underestimate that, and we can look at all the bad things, and actually that isn't a bad thing.
No, because stuff's going to go wrong, right? And that's our demonstrated value, particularly on the sales side, is not just to call them up and say, "Hey, we have candidates." You know, if your delivery team is finding candidates, that's great. But what's your value as a salesperson, account manager, is to help them solve problems, help them
Yeah.
fill their needs, and so on and so forth. So you're right; it should be seen as, "Oh, great! Here's an opportunity to gain loyalty, to show that I'm what I'm made of." And
Yeah.
actually help consult and fix the problem that they may have. And so, like, being really present. But that's another thing you see that I get now after all these years. But Lord knows I avoided it at first. And you know, you train trainees, you know better now. But like, you look at them and they're like, I don't want to have to tell my client about this problem, as opposed to being like, oh right, golly gee, we have this big problem I get to talk to them about now because I'm great. You know what I mean? So but it builds that resilience, it builds your value, right? Like to confront it head on and say, you know, hey, client, this is a problem, even to bring it up right away with them, right?
Yep.
Instead of waiting for them to say it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. It builds the trust. It strengthens the relationship. It's like any relationship, isn't it? It's like if you can get over the difficulties, then you have a stronger relationship. And I think in any relationship, in any environment, if you can actually get through it, you've got a good footing now.
Jenny, I know we're probably going to do a hard stop at 1 today, so I wanted to bring this up too. You mentioned something earlier that I thought was very interesting when we're chatting about this topic, which is examples sometimes of where you think is going to be a high is actually a low, or the perceived high that you're going for or low could be different. You were talking about a job that you were angling for in sales beforehand.
Yeah. So this is a long time ago, but before I got into recruitment, so I was a sales rep, and I was the kind of the golden sales rep job was working for a particular company, and everybody, it was kind of like the top of the top, and everyone was, you know, always saw that as the, you know, the best job in repping.
You'd arrived.
Pardon?
You'd arrived.
Absolutely. You know, great company car, mobile phone, really good uplift on your salary, and you know, brilliant training and all of that good stuff. And I had a couple of interviews with this through an agency, and on the second interview I got turned down, and the agency obviously said no, they just didn't think it was quite right for you. And I'm sort of thinking to myself, what, you know, this was a first experience of, you know, every other role, fortunately, I'd been for pretty much, if I want, you know, I'd kind of been successful in it because I was going for appropriate roles. And so I'd got turned down for it, and I was a little bit perplexed. And sort of like thought, well, they've, you know, obviously something's gone wrong here. They've made
the wrong decision here. It can't be me. It must be them.
Yeah. So I spoke to the agency and said, look, are you okay if I ring the hiring manager and kind of try and get back in front of them? Because I do genuinely think that this is a brilliant role for me. I think they're great, and I'm, you know, great on both sides. So they said, yeah, sure. And so I met with the hiring manager again, and I got offered the job. And I took it, and, you know, absolutely happy days. I'm going to be working for this place. And I absolutely hated it. Absolutely hated it. Like, and they were so right to turn me down. Their interviewing they understood my motivators. So where I'd been previously, as I was building relationships with customers, seeing them on a regular basis. Yes, it was new business. This was very structured. You had a one meeting for a year with a new customer, and you had to sign them up, and you had to have 2 meetings with an existing customer to re-sign them. And that wasn't my style. That didn't play to my strengths. But I was absolutely, you know, I think I was sort of like, I hadn't got it, and therefore it's like, actually I want it, but it wasn't right. And I always use that now when candidates are not successful in being hired in a role that they really want to go for. I'm a bit of a fatalist now. It's almost like what will be, you know. Don't underestimate the value of that interviewer and what they know about their business, and understanding what you're looking for. And actually being a no is far better than it being a yes, than giving it a go and within 6 months you're out. And the other thing that, you know, based on that, because I think that in that final meeting with this business, I tried to be what I thought they wanted me to be and where I was lacking. So I kind of morphed into this person giving all the right, answers. It wasn't what I truly felt. So I also now say to every candidate, be yourself. Yes, it's an interview, but don't try and be someone that you're not, because the worst thing that will happen is that you'll get the wrong job. That is the worst thing. And the second worst thing is that you won't get the right job because you've taken the wrong job. So therefore, the right job that's sitting there that you're going to be going for an interview in a couple of weeks' time, you won't get visibility of that. So actually, every no that you get, you have to trust in the process. And sometimes sometimes it can be quite hard to hear, but genuinely, I said all the right things to get the job, but they were spot on. They shouldn't have offered it. The no should have stayed at a no. And then I went into recruitment after that, and I found, I found everything.
You found your calling.
Yeah, I did. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it was good for me, because then I realised what it was. I was really honest with myself. I didn't want to be in a car all day. I didn't want to not have a team. All of that stuff became more prevalent, so I knew what was going to be right for me. And I think sometimes, if people do take the wrong jobs, it happens. You get missold, and perhaps you missell yourself as well. But if you learn from it, and then the next role you're much clearer on what it needs to be, you're more likely to get the right job. But I know it's hard, but I think recruiters sometimes, forget that sometimes when you're delivering a no, it's actually for the greater good of everyone, for the company and for the candidate.
Yeah.
Totally. It's just interesting because that highlights, and we just had the conversation, I didn't expect us to go this way, but it really highlights that to an extent, whether we consider something a high or low changes depending on what our expectation was, right? So it's all up here at the end of the day. And if we can get straight up here to sort of not have rigid expectations, then I think that will ease in to just sort of go with the flow, like improv, like your yes and instead of nope, this is what I wanted, and so I'm going to insist on it, and if it doesn't happen, it's a tragedy. Like that makes this whole thing a lot worse.
And I think that whether it's a high or a low also depends on the time. So right, so and I think that you only see that as time goes on, and then you can put it into perspective. So here's a quick little story for you. So during COVID, I mean, literally, I don't know what you were doing exactly, Jenny, but there was really just you and I in the business for for 3 months or so. And I was pretty much sitting on my sofa and not really doing a whole lot. And I don't know what you were doing, whether you were turning up at 9 o'clock, but I wasn't really doing very much. So, the lights were off pretty much, the doors were closed, and I wasn't doing very much. So, and then I remember in August, I got this random phone call, and I don't know whether she realizes who it is, but or that she was the person that made this call. But I picked up my phone, and it was this person I've never spoken to in my life before. And she was from a fairly large staffing firm in Toronto, and she said to me, "Oh, is this Julie?" I'm like, "Yeah." Is this the wrong number? What's going on here? And she's like, "Oh, it's so and so from sales." I'm like, "Okay, is this a joke?" And she's like, "Yeah, I wanted to sort of talk to you. I've got some vacancies that I need help with." And I'm like, "Seriously?" So I'm like, okay, this is completely unexpected from someone I've never spoken to in my life before, don't know anyone at your organization actually, and you want to give me some vacancies. So it's like, okay, suddenly let's put the lights on, let's and,
computer on.
Turn the computer on. Oh, it takes a while to boot up. The computer went on, and all of a sudden it's like, good Lord. Anyway, so I went from like, really, this is fairly dooming and gloomy here for a while, to like, oh, next day, next moment, it's like fabulous. Here are my 3 jobs that I'm going to start working on, that I'm going to try and fill. And you know what? So this was what now? So 2.5 years ago. That actual client has turned into one of my bigger clients in terms of repeat business, relationship, where we've placed, etc., etc. So, if we look at the contrast between then and now, and what that has
4
meant.
years ago. It's 4 years.
Over 4 years.
Good Lord, 4 years ago. right? So it's like,
4 years ago.
Like remarkable. And so that's just a real sort of a complete down to a complete high. And the only difference is time. Yeah. Well, not the only difference. There was a bit of a pandemic happening, but in terms of my point there, so time and pandemics have a big impact in terms of whether something is a low or a high. Yeah. And bingo's spoken. There you go.
But it takes one phone call, though, doesn't it? I think it takes one phone call.
One phone call, one email, or one something, one moment back to that, and things change completely upside down. But to the point of this whole thing, I think resilience and knowing that it will change will get you through. And sometimes if you don't have that experience, then others around you will, to let you know that it will change again, and you just got to get through and do all the things that you need to do to get there. Don't put the lights off. That was a bad Julie mistake, but you know, it was. I had some sprinkle of fairy dust there that came my way, right?
Yeah, and I guess that's it, right? It's at the end of the day, none of us know what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone in 5 minutes from now, let alone years from now. And it's that sense of trying to predict the future and it not turning out the way that we wanted. That's the really exhausting and frustrating part. It's hard to show up every day though and just sort of be like, okay, here we go. Let's just do our best. Let's just try to do our best. Keep that.
I saw something on LinkedIn, and I can't remember who wrote it, but it was basically saying that their success. It was a very successful recruiter, and their success was about not getting really down about stuff that goes wrong, but equally not getting really high, just doing this consistency in the middle and just keep going. So not allowing the highs or the lows to impact your day in a positive or a negative way. And I think it's probably harder, it's harder said than done, because I think we're only human, you get excited for people, but actually, it is quite key, isn't it? It's almost like, keep the consistency and try and measure out and get rid of the really highs and the really lows.
Again, though, I think the advice is, like you said, it's easier said than done, but I think it probably rings very different for someone who has a lot of experience versus someone just getting started. I feel like you can only truly do that after you have seen enough and done enough and tried to do the hard things. At first, I think you do need to feel it in order to get to that point, right? Like you do need to, it's hard, but you got to push past all those feelings to be able to achieve the calm, Otherwise, you're just squashing it down and you're just going to quit. I mean, you just see it, people who are like trying to stay zen early on, they just quit and they're like, no, it's too stressful. Yeah. And they seem stoic. I've seen that before. One of my favorite employees, fellow employees, whatever, who was sat next to me, was brilliant at the job, actually, really good. She picked it up right away. She was billing and everything. And then 6 months in, or a year in, actually, almost, she just texted me and I'm like, what are you texting me? Where are you? I'll give you nothing. I just told the boss that I quit. And I was like, you quit? I sit next to you every day. We have lunch together. And she was just kind of like, yeah, I got to go back to selling product. It's just too much for me, the emotional front. But she was just squashing it down. No one knew. You couldn't tell. She seemed like she was going to be a killer at this job. So it's like, yeah, it's a funny balance to deal with the emotional roller coaster.
It is. And I think if you haven't experienced it, then there's probably someone around you that has. So I think it's finding that sounding board, or someone that can share the experience that they've had that hopefully would give you confidence that it will be okay. And there are various voices on LinkedIn that will try and inspire and give you that sort of confidence too, if that's the way that you connect with others, if there isn't anybody internally or that's not the right route. And there's also Jenny. There's Jenny Finch. You can have a chat with her. No, I'm just joking. I'm just sort of joking. But there are plenty of people that have sort of been there, not done it, but have got some T-shirts that have been through the wars and seen this business warts and all, and still do it and still love it because of the highs that do outweigh the lows. Yeah, for the right people. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, there you
and
have
on
it.
that note, I'm going to have to go. I need to talk to someone else. I think you all have to, right?
We've solved all the problems, I think. So everybody just watch this and they'll be cool-headed for the rest of the time.
Good.
Thank you all for joining us. Thanks, guys, for being with us here, and have a great Wednesday.
Thank you. Bye.